Keepers of the Dark was released on the 24th of March 2016 as a standalone game in the DreadOut series. Digital Happiness was again behind its development, so it feels much like the original game did, despite there being 2 years between their release dates. The game currently stands with very positive reviews on Steam, failing to achieve an overwhelmingly positive rating, mostly due to various issues unique to KOTD, the most controversial of which being the biggest aspect that separates it from the original game. This game opts for an interesting structure, allowing you to play through its 8 levels in any order you desire. In doing this, though, it forsakes any kind of narrative in said levels, instead sprinkling the occasional quick cutscene showing the secret antagonist of the main game, Miss Siska, performing a mysterious ritual. Due to this lack of narrative, KOTD feels very inconsequential. What I expected to be an expansion or a continuation of DreadOut's story turned out to be closer to the challenge missions you unlock after beating Fatal Frame 2, each of which dropping you into one of the game's locations with a simple goal to accomplish. Since I like order and tidiness, I played through KOTD's levels in numerical order, then returned to various levels to complete specific tasks that could only be scratched off Linda's checklist after I'd found an item in a later level. The checklist itself is a nice feature, and because it doesn't tell you exactly what you need to do or where you need to go, it doesn't feel as handholdy as most modern games do. Another thing I appreciate is that the amount of backtracking I need to do through previous levels is kept fairly minimal, with only a few tasks actually requiring it. This avoids the issue of feeling like I'm spinning too many plates, as I did with games like Chilla's Arts, Akamanto and Yuki-Onna. Typically, when you acquire an item in a level, you'll either know it's necessary for progressing in this one or one you've already visited. The only downside to this system that I experienced was when I had to pull out of a level after a short amount of time because I didn't yet have means to complete it. The difference in approach to the first game, which railroaded you through different levels in a strictly linear fashion, gives this game a more approachable atmosphere, I guess. You can tackle whatever challenge you want in any order, but does this benefit the game? Does its sacrifice of narrative pay off? Is it worthy of inclusion in a playthrough of this series? Well, let's see. An opening cutscene shows us images of DreadOut's locations, with some cryptic narration by, I presume, Miss Siska, but it could also be the Lady in Red, aka the First Sister. She mentions that she has sacrificed too much to return empty-handed while showing the First Sister, possibly hinting at a collaboration between the two. Linda then awakens in limbo after getting pulled through the mirror by her reflection in the first game. As you move towards the light, a small ghostly diorama of a scene from the first game will appear from a faint blue orb. Audio from the moment captured also plays, which helps to recall the main game's events. Turning around towards the circle of candles you awakened in, you'll notice more orbs beyond it. These continue to show important moments in chronological order, ending with Linda sitting in front of the vanity mirror. After crossing into the light, you'll spawn in a large hall. Numbered doors with accompanying candles line the walls that lead to a colossal door in the center. This is the realm of the unseen, and it's maintained by a mysterious caretaker who gives you hints on what to do if you somehow don't know how to progress in the game. The numbered doors all lead to different levels, and the lit candles beside them will be extinguished when you banish a special spirit or creature within that acts as a keeper. In order to unlock the large door, at least 8 keepers must be banished. Through door 101 is the Dark Sewers, a very pretty semi-flooded sewer system apparently. Not long after stepping into the knee-high stagnant water that extends throughout the entire building, you'll notice you aren't alone. Some of the rooms are inhabited by sunken head victims and the Kuntilanak from the main game. After dispatching all of them with either your phone camera or the SLR, the area will be plunged into darkness. Due to my unfamiliarity with this game's structure at the time, I wasn't aware that all I needed to do now was return to the open courtyard and fight the keeper boss to defeat the level. Instead, I kept running about looking for something to do in the building's pitch black interior. I was especially thrown off by a large room that looks like the perfect place for a boss fight, but it does in fact serve no purpose, at least in this game anyway. Upon returning to the courtyard, the keeper of this realm, Kami, will appear, assumedly enraged by the defeat of its underlings. In terms of appearance, this boss is amazing. One large spectral head floats at the center of the courtyard's pond, surrounded by many regular-sized heads which it uses as weapons. As for its mechanics, Kami continues the DreadOut tradition of being a frustrating boss fight. It took me a good few deaths to figure out the best method of defeating it. I found that if I run from side to side at the end of the pond where there's the most space until it does its big shining red eye attack and then run over beside it while avoiding meeting its gaze, which inflicts damage, I can get in some damage of my own when it's tired and dazed post glow up. Well, so long as I'm lucky enough to not get stun locked by the heads it tosses at me anyway. It's a very frustrating fight because you think you're doing damage to the big head, but in actual fact you're just incapacitating the smaller heads that briefly pop into frame as you take the photo. I also thought that since Cammy only appeared after I'd defeated the heads in the building, I had to get it to a vulnerable state by stunning the 4 heads that attack you from each corner of the pond. It's honestly a miracle I noticed that Cammy sinks to the water's surface to rest after doing its big red light attack, because I was being constantly bombarded by the small heads. Also, I had a hard time trying to work out how to even avoid taking damage during its red light attack, because the game doesn't indicate in an intuitive way that I'm taking damage specifically because I'm looking at its eyes. Even while spamming photos with the SLR, this boss fight lasts too long. Its length is completely unjustified considering its simplicity. Regardless, when its overly numerous health points are depleted, you're booted back to the hall with 1 fewer candle to illuminate it. Through Door 102 is the first instance of location asset reuse in this game, with the repurposing of the village outskirts from the first DreadOut, this time home to the ghost of a girl riding her beloved spectral horse. This boss comes right at you and you're forced to do battle as it runs circles around you through the murky forest. Its main method of attacking is to charge straight at you, giving plenty of time to ready a shot on it. At some point during the fight though, it will summon a duplicate which has the same behaviour, making it slightly more difficult to attack the real horse while the other charges at you from behind. It's not a difficult boss fight though, so it can be beaten pretty quickly. Just like with the previous level, once you defeat a keeper, you return to the hall. I did find it odd to be presented with a boss fight almost immediately upon entering the level when there'd been at least some build up to the previous one. If you enter room 102 again, you can explore the level without being interrupted. Moving past where you battled the horse, you can find a spirit called Zook standing outside one of the houses. His echoing groans alert you to his presence, so he's easy to deal with. One shot and he disappears from this level, but can be found in a later one and defeated there. Inside the nurse's station, the ghost of a boy can be found who asks you to find something for him by piecing a photo together and bringing him whatever the photo depicts. We can't get that yet, so that's all that can be done in room 102 for now. Room 103 is the graveyard and heavenly pond from the first game, although there's no gigantic floating deity here this time. Instead, in the graveyard there are 4 gravestones with musical instruments floating above them. It's a weird thing to come across, but this is the site for a boss fight for one of the longer storylines in this game, where you encounter the ghost of a nerd intent on resurrecting his favourite band, who you then, respectfully, return to their graves where they belong. I'll come back to this later though. In the pond area, you can find another photo scrap, and for some reason a really odd piece of audio plays when you do so. You'll also get completely fucking wrecked by the Zook, who has been hired to assassinate you, but if you photograph him before he can ambush you, you'll banish him and be safe. This guy got me twice while I was trying to figure out this level, and it was incredibly startling both times. I'm usually against cheap jump scares, but since it's such a rarity in this game and it makes complete sense for an assassin to use such surprising tactics, I'm okay with it. With nothing left to do in this level, we can extract and proceed to the next. Room 104 houses the Colonial sewers, another new level. This place is disgusting, and each stretch of dank tunnel is littered with the remains of creatures and people, debris from makeshift dwellings long abandoned, and also wall-crawling grey babies? Yeah, that's an interesting choice. These babies aren't hostile, but walking through them to check for items beyond is certainly an uncomfortable endeavour. Eventually you'll encounter the Devorador, the ghastly spirit of a sociopath who tortured dogs in life. It quickly crawls towards you with its front legs since it's missing its rear, but can be defeated quite easily. Doing so, however, attracts the attention of another entity living in these tunnels. The enraged Ninetails will pursue you through the narrow spaces until retreating to a large open boss room. It's the most obviously telegraphed boss fight I've ever seen, and it doesn't seem to attack until you get within a certain distance, but with the SLR's zoom feature you can get in a sneaky shot or two to start the battle. This fight is incredibly tough. Ninetails feels a bit too mobile for this game, and its attacks can be quite hard to evade. It's certainly a welcome challenge, as it will dodge out of your field of view as soon as you raise your camera, meaning the best way to fight it is to have your SLR zoomed out fully and quickly whip it to the side as soon as you aim. If you're lucky, you'll aim the way it dodged and can get in a shot before it swipes you to the ground. While I like the challenge, I do think this boss has a few unfair attacks. The worst of which is the rush attack, where it moves towards you while slashing its huge claws in front of it. You will almost always get hit by this because it both pursues you so quickly and continues to slash for far too long. You can't run away from it because it'll catch up. You can't run to the side because it'll turn towards you. The only way you can maybe escape this is if you were already far enough away from it when it began the attack, so that it couldn't catch up with you. It also doesn't help that when you get killed and respawn, you almost always take another hit instantly because the game respawns you in the exact location you died, which is, of course, within paw's reach of the boss. Once it's defeated though, you can leave, since there's nothing else to do in this level. The 105 door opens to the deserted suburbia, another location from the first game. This is an interesting level because it has two spirits who have conflicting mechanics. The first is the spirit of a girl who tasks you with finding her in two different locations within a certain time limit. This would be fine if not for the very distracting dismembered body parts scattered throughout the town, which you need to photograph in order to summon a different boss, the Beast. On my first time through, I ran out of time, so the girl attacked me and disappeared, meaning I had to reload the level to try again. However, I had also unknowingly failed to summon Beast because I had entered his hut while searching for the girl. For some reason, most likely a bug, entering his hut before photographing all of the body parts will prevent him from spawning. Provided you do everything correctly, you can find the hiding girl and she'll reward you with some charm needles, an item required for another spirit, but I'll talk more about that when it's relevant. As for Beast, you'll know he's appeared in his hut because fresh blood will have stained the steps leading to it. It's a simple boss fight that for some reason I tried to keep contained in his small hut, even though you're free to continue it outside. I guess an area lined with rats, flies, and the rotting corpses they feed on was more appealing than the grassy streets outside. Once he's paid for his sins, there's nothing left to do here. Door 106 leads to the first game's school, but this time the entire building is filled with mannequins. A horror classic. Most of the mannequins are just regular mannequins, but some of them wear wigs of long blonde hair. You might wonder why these are different at first, especially since they moan when you take photos of them, but don't die. Eventually you'll find one of them with a more ghostly face than the rest, and upon photographing this one, the ceramic woman spirit will erupt from it and flee the scene to inhabit another. Since these host mannequins are spread out through the entire school, it can take a few minutes to find her again, and while you search you'll be followed by the previously inhabited mannequins. They only move when you're not looking at them, like Doctor Who's Weeping Angels, but you'll always hear them pursuing you because they drag their solid feet along the ground. It's really creepy at the start, and with each new mannequin you free from the ghost's control, it becomes more about being aware of your surroundings so you don't get cornered. The sound of several ceramic figures scraping their way towards you outside your periphery is definitely one of the most memorable things from this game, and I wish more stuff like this had been implemented. Eventually you'll photograph the spirit enough times to banish it, and upon returning to this level you can engage the other spirit. The Susuk Lady is an interesting boss, as you can make the fight easier by collecting more charm needles throughout the game. These can be found scattered about each level, and you even receive a few of them from the hiding ghost girl. However, if you defeat her with 10 charm needles or less, you get a trophy for it, so I did that. Interestingly, I actually think the needles you collected can be seen stuck in her body, but I might be wrong about that, so ignore me if I am. The boss fight itself is cool, but fairly simple again. You avoid her grab attack by snapping photos from afar, but you need to be wary of the environmental objects that she'll telekinetically pick up and throw at you. These can be hard to dodge, especially when it's a coffee table being chucked at your head, so they can actually stun you long enough for her to walk up to you and get a grab attack in. When you first find Susuk Lady, she's standing in front of a mirror admiring herself, so she clearly is quite proud of her looks. Looks that deteriorate as you deal damage to her. With her ugly side revealed, she'll attempt to flee from you to hide, but it's not hard to chase her down. Upon her defeat, you're returned to the hall again. Within room 107 is the abandoned village, and not long after entering you come across a tall man repeatedly bashing his head against a tree. Having had his eyes plucked from his skull, he cannot see you except when he opens his mouth to reveal a shining eyeball inside. This is how he'll locate you, but he can only do this while standing still, so it's not hard to evade him. Around this level you can find a couple of items to help weaken him, but you'll still have to battle him after collecting them. The way it's set up, I thought that we could deal with him in a peaceful manner, but that's not an option. You can lead him to an open field where it's easier to fight him, especially since you'll have space to dodge his long-range vomit attacks. The only time you can damage him is when he exposes his hidden eye, but other than that it's not a very challenging fight. In addition to him, in this level there's the Sundel Belong spirit from the first game, who is only visible through the camera's lens. You can defeat her here as well as in a later level, but she's honestly not that interesting. One thing I was curious about in this level is a series of film cameras set up around the place, although I couldn't find anything about it online. There's most likely a file I missed in the game that would explain it, but just in case there isn't, I wanted to mention it. Room 108 is the Great Hall from the first game. Not long after setting forth, you'll notice a doll, Sophie, following you much like the mannequins did, although here when you look at it, it falls to the ground like the characters in Toy Story. It's just as creepy as it was earlier, and after retrieving the final scrap of the photo, you'll realise that's the doll the boy wanted earlier in the game. Now you can grab the doll and return it to the boy, who will be banished along with it. Downstairs in the Great Hall where you fought the invisible furniture hating ghost in the first game, you'll find a gramophone. You can repair this with pieces of it that you found during the game, and another keeper will appear. This is the Tragic Dancer, and her boss fight is probably the most unique in the game. All she wants to do is dance, so you let her. While performing, she'll summon two phantoms that will dance around her. While the dancer herself won't attack you, these two will, so you need to keep moving to avoid them. It starts off easy enough, but the tempo of the song gradually increases, and with it the speed of the dancers. It's a cool fight, if you could even call it that. When she's finished, the dancer will allow you to take a photo of her in order to banish her. Remaining in this level is the Sundel Belong and the last appearance of Nerd Death, who has finished his ritual to summon the band Coil in Room 103's graveyard. Upon returning to the graveyard, you'll find it much darker than before. So dark in fact that it took me a few minutes to even find the entrance to the graveyard. Upon reaching the center of the graves, the band will resurrect for one final encore. All 4 members spawn from lightning bolts striking their graves and will immediately begin to chase you around the arena. This isn't a particularly challenging fight, although it can be frustrating due to how easy it is to get stun locked. I guess I have the same issue with this fight as I did the Ninetales fight. There's a whole lot of stun locking, trying to dodge insane jump attacks and inescapable rush attacks. And this time there are 4 members to deal with, although thankfully they're not all as nimble as Ninetales. Luckily I was able to exploit the game's bugginess by focusing my efforts on 2 of the enemies after one got stuck on a grave, then finished him off after I'd banished the rest. Fighting a resurrected rock band is a cool concept, but I wish the game had leaned more into it. If there was ever an opportunity to include cheesy rock music like the first game did, it was definitely here. But no, just a generic ambient battle soundscape. So with the final keeper dealt with, we can return to the hall and finally open that big door. As you enter the newly opened door, you're consumed by a flood of black sludge and a serpentine bellowing growl echoes through the hall. Inside is another sewer system, but this one is much tighter and labyrinthian. An unseen entity taunts you from deep within the tunnels. She soon reveals herself after attacking from beneath the water's surface. The Serpent mistress is the final boss of this game and is, unfortunately, but not surprisingly, really damn annoying. She spends most of her time taunting you from out of sight until she bursts up from beneath you to attack, which of course knocks you down and only gives you the briefest of moments to get an attack of your own before she submerges herself again. This can go on for quite a while since it's so difficult to get an effective shot on her, and the fact that you can only really attack her after she attacks you feels wholly unfair. I even tried to take a photo of her while she was underwater, but that didn't seem to work. Whenever you've gotten lucky enough to do enough damage to her, she'll switch to her second phase, in which her body will adapt more of the characteristics of her crocodile half and she'll attack much more aggressively and straightforward. Thankfully, she's easier to deal with now, because she's mostly abandoned her guerrilla tactics. Eventually you'll defeat her and will be transported to a different location. Here we see the Serpent mistress stand before a photo of the first daughter from the original game, and when we photograph the solitary candle at her feet, she'll be grabbed and torn out of sight by a huge hand that erupts from the painting. A cryptic voice speaks to Linda, telling her she's ready and that she should go and prove she's worth the promise she made to them. You then make your way to an ornate golden door with many ghostly figures lining the path to it. So before this final cutscene plays, I'm going to recap what Miss Siska has been up to so far in this game. We first see her entering the bedroom with the vanity table that Linda sits in front of in the first game. This, of course, is happening in the background while Linda is dealing with all sorts of horrific things elsewhere. Siska approaches the mirror and we see a candle be extinguished. I just realised, and I'm actually going off script here, but this candle might be representative of the life of one of the students she took during that game. We next see her chanting in front of the mirror and drawing a ritualistic symbol on its reflective surface. If anyone can translate what she says here, I'd greatly appreciate it, as we don't get subtitles. In the final snippet, we're shown her summoning a spirit who can only be seen in the mirror's reflection. Its face rapidly switches between different appearances. So, back to the ending cutscene. Upon entering the door, we see that figure again, morphing their face into many, this time including Miss Siska and Linda's. Linda's appearance fades into Miss Siska's as she approaches the door, and upon passing through it, they separate again. Siska then shatters the vanity mirror with the first sister inside, resulting in her appearance changing to how we see her in the original game's final battle. It's not very clear, but Siska had apparently struck up a deal with the first sister to have Linda brought to the mirror realm in exchange for the first sister's power of eternal youth. But after Linda defeated everything inside, Siska broke the deal and took off with the Serpent child, possibly as a plan B. In defeating the Serpent mistress, Linda becomes a Keeper of the Dark. What that exactly means, I guess we'll have to find out in DreadOut 2. Hopefully. After the credits, if you've defeated every keeper in the game and interact with the mirror in the main hall, Linda will awaken at the entrance of the school where the final boss fight of the first game takes place. This is the good ending and ties neatly back into the events of the first game. And that's DreadOut, Keepers of the Dark. I'm not sure why this is treated and marketed as a standalone game, since it's basically just a DLC. Not only does it take place within the main game, but it also requires knowledge of its events for you to have any idea of what's going on. One thing I find weird is how, even though KOTD released 2 whole years after the first DreadOut, it's completely identical in mechanics and visuals. This paired with the basic structure of the game and the immense amount of asset reuse makes me wonder why it took 2 years to develop. Unfortunately, there's barely any info online and I couldn't research the development more, so I don't have an answer for that. All I know is that after 2 years I would have expected something a little more substantial than what we got. The non-linear level select structure of the game is fine as it is, but I don't think it works as the basis for an entire DLC. Maybe being an unlockable game mode after beating the main game would have been more appropriate. For this reason, KOTD seems to me like a low effort cash grab. Digital Happiness got to reuse a bunch of assets and maybe put some to use that were cut from the main game. They seemingly didn't bother fixing any of the game's jank, bugs, balance, performance and audio issues, of which there are plenty of each. They just slapped a mostly unnecessary narrative into this bare experience and called it a day. And I say that with as much respect as possible because I don't think it was done completely out of malice. It's unfortunate because there's so much potential here. Nearly all of the enemies in this game are new and each has their own dark and twisted lore just like in the first game. I would have loved some new locations to put these folkloric entities in because on the few occasions KOTD does do this, it works amazingly well. This game's enemy designs are on par with the original games. That is to say, they're amazing. My favourites of which would probably be the horse, because it's just so out there, and Ninetales, because when that Scooby-Doo demon rounded that tunnel corner and took up my entire screen, boy did my soul jump out of my body for a second. I wish the combat had been more refined for this entry, as it still shares the same issues as the first game. Enemies can stunlock you incredibly easily, and dying is a frequent event during gameplay. Thankfully, the devs did listen to some of DreadOut's feedback and removed the terrible messages that appeared during the limbo sequence. The combat is definitely a wide-felt problem, as I found many people complaining about several boss fights on community forums. The bosses are either too easy, too difficult, or the method of which to defeat them is too obscure. Or hell, sometimes it's both of the latter. Luckily, none of them were quite as frustrating as I found the pig to be in DreadOut, but a couple come quite close, and I don't think the apparent improvement was due to an intentional desire to design better experiences. I think it's just pure happenstance. The puzzles are simple again, but I like how some keepers require you to gather items from multiple levels in order to help banish them. This only works because of the level select structure, so I'm thankful that something exists to give it more of a purpose. None of the puzzles are that challenging and can be solved quickly due to the shortness of each level. Linda's checklist is also helpful for keeping track of what goes where if you do somehow get confused, and the caretaker will offer hints and remind you of what each level requires to complete it. KOTD is just as broken as DreadOut was, and sometimes feels like it's barely holding together. The audio issues persist. Even though the audio quality is often quite good, it's implemented poorly in the game, leading to sound effects beginning or cutting off abruptly when a new sound effect plays or you cross over a threshold within the environment. You can also still encounter pockets of ambient soundscape within the environment that can completely ruin the otherwise solid atmosphere that the game can create. Environmental assets also have a tendency to pop in and out of existence on a whim, leading to a very unstable experience. The game generally runs quite well, so I don't know why this couldn't have been improved upon. All KOTD's issues seem more exposed due to the lack of a narrative to distract from them. I can't overlook small issues like I could in the first game because it's all I see now. After saying all this though, I still don't find myself as annoyed as I probably should be. Keepers of the Dark has all the hallmarks of a game that I should hate, but I still somehow find it charming. Maybe it's because I know it's not a AAA game and don't expect that kind of experience. I also really appreciate the effort the developers put into depicting Indonesian folklore and culture, so even if the gameplay is a bit wonky and there's not much of a story there, I still get to explore a world full of these horrid and disgusting monstrosities. That makes it almost worth it to me, but I'd understand if not everyone feels the same. I think if you go into this game wanting more narrative, then you'll leave disappointed. But if you just wanted more of that DreadOut gameplay experience, then you'll be very satisfied, because it is just more of that, faults and all. Before I go, I'd like to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon. At the moment, hilariously, there's only one, but Rainfan gets an extra special thank you for being a tier 3 patron. There's a link in the description for anyone else interested in becoming a patron. I upload 2 short reviews a month on there and 3 are available so far, the latest of which being Gonjam Haunted Asylum. Anyway, that's all from me. Thanks for watching.